So when you hear the word disaster, what pops into your head, right? A huge earthquake? Maybe a terrifying tsunami? We tend to see these things as just random, unpredictable acts of nature. But is that really the whole story? What if I told you disasters aren't random at all, and that the biggest factors are, well, us? Let's get into it.
Okay, so to really get our heads around what a disaster is, we've got to look beyond the earthquake or the storm itself, and really focus on what it does to people. And you know what? Let's start with one of the most tragic events in recent memory to see what I mean.
So back on December 26, 2004, a massive earthquake happened under the ocean, and it triggered a huge tsunami. But here's the thing. The earthquake itself wasn't the disaster. This was the disaster. Almost 250,000 people gone, across 14 different countries. That number, it's just staggering. And it proves the point. Disasters are defined by their human cost, period.
And you know, the word itself is actually pretty interesting. If you break it down, disaster literally means bad star. Kind of cool, right? It shows how ancient people thought these things were just cosmic bad luck. But our modern understanding is way more down to earth. It has nothing to do with the stars. It's all about a community getting hit with something so big, so overwhelming, that it just can't handle it with its own resources.
All right, so if it's not some bad star, then what does create a disaster? What's the recipe for catastrophe? Well, it's not fate. It's actually a formula, a really simple but super powerful equation that helps us unpack what's going on and maybe even stop it from happening.
First up, you need a hazard. Pretty straightforward, right? This is the thing that happens. The earthquake, the flood, the cyclone. It could even be something man-made, like a big chemical spill. It's basically the potential source of the damage.
But here's the key. A hazard by itself doesn't automatically mean a disaster. For that to happen, you need the second ingredient, and honestly, this one is everything. It's called vulnerability. And this is all about the human side of the equation. You know, are people living in buildings that aren't built to code? Are they stuck in a low-lying area with nowhere to go? Does poverty mean they have fewer choices to get to safety? That is vulnerability.
So you take a hazard, you add in that vulnerability, and what do you get? You get risk. And risk is just the chance, the probability that something really bad is actually going to happen. The likelihood of real people getting hurt, of real homes being destroyed. And this simple equation really is the heart of this whole thing. Think about it. An earthquake that happens out in the middle of an empty desert, well, it's just an interesting geological event, right? But take that exact same earthquake and put it under a crowded city with poorly built homes. Now you've got a full-blown disaster. The hazard didn't change, but the vulnerability, it changed everything. Okay, so here's where it gets really interesting. Where does human development, progress, fit into all this? I mean, we usually think that as we develop, we get safer, right? We have better tech, stronger economies, but it can actually be a total double-edged sword. Sometimes progress can make us more vulnerable. I mean, look, on one hand, development is great. It gives us amazing tools to lower our vulnerability. Things like stronger building codes, better hospitals, and early warning systems. But on the other hand, when that development is rapid and unplanned, it can do the complete opposite. Just think about all the cities sprawling onto floodplains, or those beautiful tourist resorts built right in the path of hurricanes. We're basically building bigger, more expensive targets for disaster to hit. So, if vulnerability is the real problem here, how do we fix it? How do we break this destructive cycle, especially when our own progress can make things worse? Well, the good news is there's a blueprint for this. A global standard for safety. And it's not just a one-and-done thing. It's a continuous loop, a proactive cycle of action.
It's called the disaster management cycle. So, it starts way before anything bad happens with what we call mitigation. That's stuff like making sure buildings are built to last. Then you've got preparedness. This is having your evacuation plans ready, making sure warning systems work. Response is what happens right after the event, the search and rescue, the immediate help. And finally, there's recovery. And this is crucial. It's not just about rebuilding. It's about rebuilding better and smarter so that when the cycle starts over, you're less vulnerable than you were before.
Okay, so this all sounds good in theory, right? But does it actually work in the real world? Oh yeah, this isn't just some textbook concept. We have some incredible, dramatic proof that this cycle saves lives. So let's look at a tale of two cyclones. They hit the exact same place in India, but just 14 years apart. All right, let's go back to 1999. A massive super cyclone slams into the state of Odisha. Back then, the response was mostly reactive.
Basically, they were dealing with the aftermath, and the result was just tragic. Around 10,000 people lost their lives.
Now, let's jump forward to 2013. A cyclone with pretty much the same terrifying power, Cyclone Phelan, is heading for that exact same coast. But this time, the number of deaths was 45. I mean, from 10,000 to 45, that is an incredible difference. So the big question is, what changed?
It wasn't the storm that changed. It was the system. In those 14 years, India went all in on that disaster management cycle. For Cyclone Phelan, they had fantastic early warning systems. They pulled off one of the biggest evacuations in human history, moving almost 1 million people to safety before the storm even made landfall. They went from being reactive to being proactive, and that shift, it saved thousands upon thousands of lives.
I mean, this is just an amazing success story, and it really shows us the way forward. It proves that we absolutely can lower our vulnerability and save lives. But just as we're getting better at managing risk, a new global problem is basically turning up the volume on the hazards themselves.
And that problem is climate change. You can think of it as a threat multiplier. It's making extreme weather events, like those cyclones, like floods, like heat waves, happen more often and with more power. This quote here really nails it. The dangers we face aren't just staying the same, they're getting worse faster. And that puts an incredible amount of pressure on all of our safety systems.
And that brings us right back to where we started. We asked if disasters were just random acts of nature, and I think we know the answer now, don't we? It's a definite no. They are the predictable result of a hazard hitting a vulnerable population. But the story of those 2 cyclones in India shows us something amazing. We can change that result. We can rewrite the ending. And that's really the key takeaway here. Yeah, the hazards might be getting stronger, but our vulnerability, that's not set in stone. It's something we can control. It's a series of choices. So the really big question for our future isn't about the storms that are coming. It's about how strong we choose to build our communities today. So I'll leave you with this. Are we building that resilience fast enough?